These are all things that I think business executives dedicate time, money, and effort to because they know it's critical to the success of their business. But for some reason, IT becomes a little bit of a redheaded stepchild. People see it as a cost center exclusively and not necessarily something that can be a critical advantage for security. Certainly. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the introduction, Ron. Shipshape IT is a managed services provider in the IT space in the lower mid-market. In the last few years, we've also played quite a bit in the managed security services space. We're primarily going after the legal industry, government contractors, federal contractors, the healthcare industry, and the nonprofit industry. It's not to say that we don't do professional services firms other than that, but we found that much of our application level expertise is unique to those industries, and we can be much more competitive competing in that particular space. We're headquartered in Bethesda. It's where everyone used to report to a good 4 or 5 months ago, and now we're distributed and dispersed like everybody else is. And we're going to chat about a little bit of that today and how that affects your workforce from an ops and a security perspective. I hope you find it interesting. I'm always very interested and intrigued when I see a story like Scott's. It's not often you get the inside perspective on what happens at a billion-dollar company, and I really appreciate the forthcoming nature of what Scott shared. It's been my experience that most executives don't. This becomes a pride of ownership where people often don't disclose this kind of data. I think the other misnomer and difficulty that can come with a story like this is the audience and the market at large tends to believe that this is something unique to large companies that have critical IP and sensitive data that people are after. And it's been my experience that that's very much not the case. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to my presentation at this stage. And we'll run through a little bit of those details. And feel free to interrupt if you have any questions. So one of the great misnomers about data security, can everybody see the presentation there?
We do.
Okay, excellent. So all the names and logos that you see here, these are organizations that are probably, half of these are known to the people on the call today. The thing that makes all of these common and what they all have in a similar crisis is they all had publicly disclosed data breaches that affected their business, their public relations, and frankly, their bottom line. Again, same misnomer here. People will see companies like Equifax that have a 150 million record breach of people's personal credit histories, and they think that this is the problem that affects the world when it comes to cybersecurity. The truth and sad reality is that this really impacts businesses of all kinds, particularly in the small and mid-sized business space. On average, they see a $200,000 financial hit whenever a company is successfully attacked. HIPAA compliance, everyone's heard the story about the city of Baltimore facing a ransomware attack. Without a pivot, they had to pay $6 million to recover from that. These are the kinds of things that destroy careers and in many ways destroy business. Painful story from the field. Inc. magazine did a story last year and assembled a great deal of data and did some analyses on what exactly the statistics are on this. 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small business, which was something that surprised me when I learned that last year. 14% are prepared to defend themselves of our small businesses in the market. $200,000 per incident, repeating that item there for emphasis. 50% of small businesses that suffered a breach within the last year. That breach doesn't have to necessarily be a publicly disclosed crisis. It could be one record, one employee, but get a feel for just how prevalent that is. 25% of Americans won't do business with a data breach company. Think about yourself, and you think about the Yahoo hack for email history, the Equifax hack. How often do you want to go and repatronize those kinds of businesses? And I think that's a struggle that a lot of small business owners, the audience today is mostly companies under $15, $20 million that are very integrated with their local economy. The management team and ownership is known to their clients very closely. You can imagine the impact on any business when they see this kind of crisis. And what we see, frankly, with small businesses is they don't get out ahead of this. This is something from a legal standpoint. They'll dedicate time, money, and effort. Accounting, their contract law, their employee documents. These are all things that I think business executives dedicate time, money, and effort to because they know it's critical to the success of their business. But for some reason, IT becomes a little bit of a redheaded stepchild. People see it as a cost center exclusively and not necessarily something that can be a critical advantage for security or making their product offering more competitive for their clients. So with all of that fear and uncertainty and doubt and the horrors of what happens to small businesses, we wanted to take the step of bringing your organizations aware of a law firm who's been very successful in the DC area. Hulan, Berman, Fincy, and Levenstein has offices in Greenbelt and Rockville, Maryland. They've been at the security game and well ahead of the curve for a number of years. And we're going to chat with Alan very briefly. Hulan Berman is focused on family law, personal injury, medical malpractice, and criminal defense work. Alan Levenstein is the managing partner of the firm, and he, more than anybody within the firm, spearheaded this effort to be more proactive about data protection before it was cool. And we're going to ask him to share his input today. So hi, Alan. Welcome to the team.
Thanks for joining us. We came to Shipshape IT 3 years ago over concerns of what our responsibilities were to our clients, both from a fiduciary standpoint and a statutory standpoint. We were also concerned about proper and careful business management. There were American Bar Association recommendations, and frankly, we were trying to obtain E&O and cybersecurity insurance, and in order to do so, the carriers required certain things steps be taken prior to them issuing coverage. So we reached out to Brian, and they at Shipshape encrypted all of our local desktops, our laptops, our jump drives and tablets. Now, if any of those are stolen or lost and any of our clients' and firm data is technically at risk, we're protected. We also set up a secondary authentication and login system using our cell phones that makes it difficult, if not really impossible, for somebody outside our firm to access our email, even if there's a stolen password. We also followed Shipshape's suggestion about having the mail system stamp every email that comes from the outside as an external message. It minimizes the chance of an outside email deceiving members of our staff and our attorneys. So there are some other items that are more technical and others related to disaster recovery planning that are a bit above my skills and technical knowledge, which Brian can speak to, but that was our experience.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. That's helpful for both me and the team, and I appreciate the plug there. A couple of things that Alan touched on there. What I call event-driven tactics for security. These are baseline items that now in 2020 we require of all of our clients. Having encrypted desktops, having more than one piece of information needed to log in besides a username and a password. That's typically called multi-factor authentication or dual-factor authentication. So the idea is that if someone steals your password, you have a way to protect against that. These kinds of technologies are now, Alan was ahead of the curve when implementing these in early 2018, and now they've become almost commonplace and required by anybody that's really being proactive around security. Couple items and takeaways. We're not going to get into a great deal of technical work and technical detail because it can not necessarily be interesting for everybody. But if any of these items are of interest, I want you to feel free to ping Dan Blatt or myself after the call or an email, and we'll be glad to provide some detail. Our business drivers, business motivations for this, Alan's issues around the bar and fiduciary responsibilities are very common for regulatory compliance needs, regardless of industry. HIPAA compliance, if you're a GovCon, you have 800-171, NIST mandates. Every industry has some level of compliance mandate or for their governing organization, for lack of a better term, that they have to comply with certain protocols. These also get things like timely updates to desktops, antivirus definitions. As our company president or CEO is fond of saying, that no backup solution is 100% effective 100% of the time, so you need more than one. And that's one of the central elements of disaster recovery planning. As you work through the worst case scenarios, this really requires more than one solution and a great deal of proactive effort. Accountability and exceptions. Has anybody had that instance where virus definitions don't get updated on a desktop because you have a user that won't hit the button and then they become exploited? Centrally managed automated threat mitigation solutions allow third parties to be able to discover that and proactively go to these clients if people aren't doing what they're supposed to. We see it often where senior executive won't be saving the data to a place that they can get backed up. They'll be undisciplined about that. You often need to go out of your way to fix that. So other technical necessities, we won't spend any time on those of consequence. Email continuity systems are critical nowadays. Antivirus and anti-malware is almost a given. Data backup and storage is something that requires stakeholder time and input. When I say stakeholder, meaning your team, your executive team, figuring out where that data is and what you're going to do with it. Enhanced login security with multi-factor authentication and protecting devices for endpoint encryption and enabling remote monitoring and support. So when something does go down, you're not waiting until an end user is affected in order to affect that change. All of that was a problem before the COVID-19 paradigm shift, right? All of this became difficult and relatively expensive for small businesses. And now, since this COVID-19 paradigm shift, there's devices accessing your network that are often, people have heard the term BYOD, where companies now have their employees' home PCs and home iPads that are storing data, which can be a problem for an IP protection. And also if you have a rogue employee, as Scott mentioned, and you need to be able to delete the data on their systems, that can be an issue if these are personal systems that you don't have proper software on or proper governance over to go and delete data that's on there. Email attacks are the primary vector, which is going to get me to the final slide and what we're going to recommend you do. Very consistent with Scott's point, which is around behavior management. The technology requirements, often people get too focused on, in my opinion, and managing staff behaviors, training and documentation of those, and then a loop back mechanism becomes the critical function if you want to stop people from doing behaviors that put your organization at risk. Kind of case in point there, across all industries and sizes, the average phish-prone percentage was 37.9%. So when testing and sending malicious links to end users, almost 40% of the time, the average user will click on that. So that's the big takeaway of what I have for you today is internet security awareness training. There's technology in place that is automated and consistent and provides a loopback mechanism that formally tests end users on their internet behaviors. So if they are getting a malicious link and they click on it, that's reported and tallied. If they're reporting it as they've been trained to, then that is reported and tallied. And if they do nothing about it, that is also reported and tallied. Because we all know the reality with employees. You can give them training, but if you don't have a loopback mechanism that you're testing that training and you're doing some kind of enforcement to modify those behaviors, you're going to get a situation when people click on malicious links. Similarly, out-of-band verification process, what does that mean? What that means is nobody ever can send an email to request a check and then it gets done. Accounts payable staff have to have a formal loopback mechanism where a communication other than email is done to verify that email request. If you talk about anybody that has experienced check fraud and had financial loss or wire fraud due to their business, it's usually an email attack vector, and it's usually the person receiving that email and taking action without verification. And then the last thing we have there, and I'm wrapping up, is documentation. Documentation is the catch-all. Once you put these behavior modification manners in place, you have to have it in your new hire orientation. You have to talk to people like Lane Hornfeck and Alan Levenstein about getting that updated in your employee manuals, your offer letters, any kind of compliance documentation that you might have. If these changes that you're enforcing aren't memorialized, and then they're also not retrained at some type of repetitive basis, you're not going to get the change in behaviors that you want. So that's the whole takeaway. Sorry to get a little bit technical on you there, but hopefully you found it helpful.